Hello and welcome to Ontario Generation's first ever From Strategy to Action event, Advancing ED&I in the Energy Sector. My name is Michelle Folliott and I am the Director for Ethics and Equity at Ontario Power Generation. I have the pleasure of being your MC and panel moderator for today's event. I want to begin by first acknowledging that OPG's facilities across the province are located on the treaty and traditional territories of Indigenous people. I'm joining today from Toronto, which is Treaty 13 territory and the traditional lands of the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Chippewa, the Anishinaabe, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat people. As a descendant of settlers and immigrants, I acknowledge that the privileges and benefits we enjoy as citizens of Ontario are rooted in the long-standing treaties and historical relationships between Indigenous and non-Indigenous people. OPG is committed to fostering positive, mutually beneficial relationships with Indigenous people and communities across Ontario, and we really strive to embody the spirit of these treaties through our actions, relationships, and programs. These commitments inform the work that we're here to talk about today, so I'm so pleased that you've joined us all to talk about OPG's ED&I strategy and to hear from community partners who are advancing cultures of equity, diversity, inclusion, and belonging in and beyond the energy sector. We have an incredible panel today, and we also have an amazing spoken word performance from Randell Adjei, Ontario's first Poet Laureate. So I'm so excited for all of this. Following the panel discussion, we'll hear from Randell. So before we get into it, I'd like to welcome Wendy Key, Chairperson of OPG's Board of Directors, to share some opening remarks. Welcome, Wendy.
Thank you, Michelle, for the introduction, and good afternoon and welcome everyone for joining us today. I am proud to serve as OPG's board chair since 2019. During that time, I have helped break down barriers of gender and race and have been an example of what can be possible for our employees and our future leaders. As only one of a few board chairs in the country and a member of a visible minority, ED&I has always been close to my heart. As the world and our industry quickly change, it is imperative that we all take up the commitment to advance ED&I, to build a more diverse and inclusive workforce, not only for OPG's future success, but also for the betterment of society. It is our path to generating better discussions, better decisions, and better outcomes, as well as creating environments where everyone can work safely and to their full potential every day. It hasn't always been easy, and it has taken many years of work by many people to get where we are today. We have indeed accomplished a lot so far at OPG. Today, women comprise 60% of OPG's independent board members and 50% of our executive team. This is industry-leading progress, but we all know much more still needs to be done. That's why I'm so pleased to share OPG's 10-year ED&I strategy, which builds on our promise to accelerate equity, celebrate diversity, and foster a culture of inclusion throughout the organization. Since the beginning, OPG has worked to acknowledge and address systemic barriers and to ensure advancement of ED&I within the company and in our communities. We knew these efforts could not fully advance without a formal commitment and a dedicated focus. In 2020, the board endorsed OPG's strategic vision to formalize a comprehensive ED&I commitment. Our strategy lays out our plan to become one of Canada's best diversity employers by 2023 and a global leader in ED&I best practices by 2030. Over the next several years, we will rely on these two external benchmarks to hold ourselves accountable, measure our progress, and ensure advancement. These are aggressive goals, but we are well on our way to building an engaged, diverse, and healthy workforce that will help us meet our goal for a net zero future. I want to thank those who have been leading the ED&I charge within OPG and across our communities. In particular, our ethics and equity team and staff who have worked hard to develop the strategy. By working together, we can drive progress to advance equity, diversity, and inclusion in the energy sector and foster a sense of belonging for all. Thank you for joining us for what is sure to be an excellent discussion from a very distinguished panel. Over to you, Michelle. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Wendy. And as always, thank you for your leadership in this topic. It's always a pleasure to speak with you and work with you. Okay, so I'd now like to invite our distinguished panel to join in the conversation about moving from strategy to action in the ED&I sector. And I want to make sure that I get everybody's title right. So joining me today, we have Sagal Abdi, who is the program manager at the BlackNorth Initiative. We have Terri-Lynn Wood, Manager of Indigenous Engagement and Special Projects at OCNI, the Organization for Canadian Nuclear Industries. We have Nikki Samuel, the Director of ED&I as part of the HR and Equity Office at Durham College. And we have Channa Perera, VP of Regulatory and Indigenous Affairs at Electricity Canada. So welcome, panelists, and thank you all for joining us today. My hope is that we can really speak candidly, share our experiences so that our audience can walk away with new insights and an increased sense of readiness to really charge forward and advance the work in their own workplaces. So I'm going to start the discussion with a question that really considers aspects of our strategy as against the realities of advancing this work in our sector. So as you just heard from Wendy, our strategy is really about a roadmap to help us on this journey from where we are right now to ED&I excellence by 2030. And we built this strategy on the Global Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Benchmark, which is a series of a tracking mechanism, let's say, based on global best practices that have put together to help organizations like ours along this journey. The strategy uses 15 priorities grouped into 4 areas of focus. And as of now, we have close to 100 short, medium, and long-term actions to drive ED&I. It was critically important to us that this strategy isn't just words on a page, right? That it's a practical, tactical roadmap with concrete deliverables and metrics, because we know if ED&I work is not impactful or is performative, then results are not going to be effective. And the risk is that groups that have been marginalized may be further disadvantaged or disengaged from the process if they feel like it's just talk and no action. So all of that is a lead up to my first question, which is, how can organizations in the energy sector really make sure that their commitments are going to truly advance change at all levels? So Channa, I'm going to start with you on this one.
All right. Thank you, Michelle. Thank you for the question and the introduction. But first, let me congratulate OPG for introducing this comprehensive strategy based on well-recognized global diversity, equity, and inclusion benchmarks. This is tremendous first step. But as with anything, sometimes good intentions can become performative. Not just on this issue, but on other issues as well, be it sustainability, net zero emissions by 2050, or similar issues. But now with increased interest from the stakeholder community on environmental social governance, becoming performative is no longer an option. So how can we avoid that? There are many actions you can take, but I suggest perhaps focusing on some of the strategic elements needed to ensure sustainable change going forward. First, as with any business transformation, connect your ED&I strategy to your corporate vision, mission, and the values. This is about shifting the company's culture and ensuring long-term buy-in from management and your employees. Second, establish a robust governance or management framework with oversight and review by senior management. Ideally, accountability for implementing the plan across the enterprise should rest with the Chief Diversity and Inclusion Officer. Third, I think you should measure performance. It is difficult, but measure performance and set achievable targets. Empower your employees and leaders to achieve them and contribute to that collective vision. Over time, connect these individual connect the targets to individual incentive plans. I think that's crucial over the long term as well. And finally, while education and training are tremendously important, think about how you can support employees in the development of emotional intelligence, increase the level of empathy within the company. The more we have that, the more we can understand each other. So I'll stop there, Michelle. Thank you.
Oh, that's wonderful. That gives us so much to talk about. What a wonderful start. Thank you. I'm gonna pass it over to Sagal. I have so many things to say, but let's hear from our next panelist.
So I do want to echo the sentiment of Channa. Thank you, OPG, for such a comprehensive plan for your equity and diversity, and happy to be here to have this discussion. So in short, and I shouldn't say in short, but to answer the question, because it is a massive question, first thing that organizations can do to ensure their commitment to advance change in the ED&I space is including marginalized and underrepresented groups at all levels of their organizations. For example, if you are creating a policy around career advancement, making sure that a diverse group of racial minorities are present at the table during the designing concept would add value. And it would also, of course, for example, if you're looking to increase representation or recruitment for BIPOC groups as well, making sure that the voices of those you are looking to recruit are also present at the time during interview process. We all have biases, and according to a 2019 survey from BCG, about 39% of Black Canadians agreed that their organization have the right mechanism in place in order to ensure major promotion decisions are free of bias. And therefore, there is still a lot of room for us to grow in there. And to ensure that we can address any gaps, we need to have different voices at the table. Of course, while creating those policies without the input of racial minorities, then these policies will most likely will not produce the desired outcome, and they will fail to understand the challenges faced by minorities when in the workplace. We have certainly been living by that concept. And for example, when we do design our programs, we ensure to have all stakeholders at the table. For example, for our Youth Accelerator program, with CIBC, we've ensured to also have and engage a community partner, in this case, Boys and Girls Club, in order to ensure we can address all relevant questions and tailor the program to the community need. So having a voice to represent all parties is always quite essential. Now, of course, in order to make concrete changes and to have and to be able to have output, you would need to measure your impact and progress. And by doing so, we did design the Racial Equity Playbook, which provides a list of tools and tactics for organizations to fulfill their diversity and equity and inclusion goal and be more equitable corporate citizens. It goes from building inclusive or shaping by building and shaping inclusive pipelines and equitable hiring processes to all levels, but also creating and developing retention and promotions, and also reducing that like-to-like racial compensation gap. We are also currently working on a recruitment platform through the BlackNorth Connect program. We're very excited about that, but this will bridge the gap between BIPOC community and corporate Canada. And we are very pleased to have partnered with OPG on this project. There is a misunderstanding when it comes to the lack of Black or BIPOC talent. And therefore, this tool will shed light on the massive pool that we know exists and connect employers, and of course, all 500 corporate signatories within our database with qualified and viable potential candidates. I want to take this moment to thank OPG for stepping in and partnering with us and helping us close this gap and create the connection and visibility needed for our community.
Oh.
So I'll stop here because I could say a lot more.
We could keep talking all day. We are absolutely thrilled to be partnering with BlackNorth on this, and we cannot wait to see all of the impacts of this program. I mean, when we talked about it, Sagal, it's really about this sort of generational wealth and generational opportunity, and we're also incredibly excited. So thank you for mentioning that. Okay, Nikki, I'm coming to you.
Hi, everybody. Thank you, Michelle, and to the team for putting on this event, and also to include me and my voice in this process. So in terms of thinking about this question, a couple of thoughts come to mind. I am definitely in agreement with Sagal and Channa in terms of some of the concrete and actionable strategies that they've put forward. One of the things as an equity practitioner in particular is that we have to have, as much as there is strategy and we've put together the best plan and the best steps towards creating a more inclusive environment, what is definitely important is the willingness and authenticity behind those actions, right? So if we have the best plan, but our folks aren't willing or aren't there yet, that our plan can probably be stalled. So I wanna sort of, in thinking about this question, ensure that we are preparing all stakeholders, our internal stakeholders, as well as our external partners for these types of conversations, right? And also when we are trying to, move away from that performative piece, the authenticity. So are you actually including the voices of marginalized groups? Are you asking them their opinions, right? So these are some of the things that we have to sort of keep in mind. Another key piece of this is when we talk about EDI work, sometimes we negate race, or because we shy away from it, it's uncomfortable, but EDI is uncomfortable work, right? And we have to remember, even in thinking of our partnerships, that we continue to center race, especially within the energy sector. So our current partners are, looking at gender identity as well as gender expression, our Indigenous communities, our Black communities, as well as our people of color, right? So in addition to our persons with disabilities. So we have to try and really create individualized strategies to ensure that all equity groups feel included, but it's not the responsibility of just one department or one person. It actually takes all of us to move this needle forward on a continuous basis. So I think I'll pause there to ensure that other voices are included. So thank you.
Thank you, Nikki. Terri-Lynn, any final thoughts on this question?
Hi, everyone. Thanks, Michelle. And I just want to say thank you to OPG for inviting me to be part of this important discussion. I believe that there needs to be a holistic systems approach to achieve systemic change. Strategies need to be incorporated and implemented at all levels of the organizations, whether that, through policies and procedures, hiring, retention, and succession practices, education and training, leadership, establishing meaningful community partnerships, employee resource groups and committees, and driving organizational accountability. All of these are needed to embed ED&I into the overall organizational culture. It's also important to acknowledge and for people to understand the deep-rooted historic disadvantage, present-day reality, how racism and discrimination are embedded in current social structures, and how to recognize its current impacts, which also includes our own unconscious biases. It's also important to recognize that racism and discrimination affect marginalized groups differently. So any strategy needs to keep that into account and to be inclusive and contain targeted measures to address the different realities of each group. When it comes to measurement, organizations could utilize independent third-party verifiers for external benchmarking. So for example, OCNI is a member of the Canadian Council for Aboriginal Business, and we are part of their Progressive Aboriginal Relations Program. So it's a certification program that confirms corporate performance, and they go through an independent external verification and juried review. And it's been paramount for our program and developing framework.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Some real themes coming out in this answer here. I'm hearing a lot about metrics and measurements, making sure that we have folks at the table, and particularly focusing on folks who have been previously excluded because of race or other disadvantage, marginalized voices, having a fundamental part in the creation of these strategies and in steering the work. And then measuring, right? Always finding a way to actually track progress and make sure that we're moving in the right direction. Good. Well, thank you, everybody. Okay, our next question is coming from an OPG employee via video link. So we'll go to that question now.
Hello, everyone. My name is Sarah McGuire, and I am a supervising nuclear operator at Ontario Power Generation, and also one of the co-chairs for our Pride at OPG Employee Resource Group. This employee resource group is one of many, along with several local equity, diversity, and inclusion committees at various sites, and many ED&I champions like myself across all business units at OPG. Here is a question for this panel. Organizations in the energy sector are experiencing challenges to advancing equity initiatives. From backlash by members of non-equity seeking groups who may feel left behind, to members of equity seeking groups who don't want to be tokenized. How do we address this?
Okay, so this is a big question that practitioners are dealing with both within and beyond the energy sector. We know that there's backlash, and how do we address it effectively? Nikki, I'm going to start with you for this one.
Thank you, Michelle. Definitely a huge question. And as you rightly said, this is not only to the energy sector, but across the sectors in general. So when we're thinking of this particular question, we always seem to think that we're further along in our journey than we actually are. So it's really taking that sort of cognitive as well as organizational cultural shift as well. So if we think about education and going back to that initial point around willingness and authenticity, these are important tools that can help us in addressing some of these challenges. So your educational awareness helps to provide non-equity individuals or folks belonging to non-equity seeking groups the opportunity to become more aware of the issues that are out there. Also, with the authenticity, it assists in mitigating those feelings of tokenizing. And what I mean by it is that you see somebody, you hear somebody, you actually invite them into this sort of conversation. So again, going back to including our marginalized groups and voices in the decision-making process, as well as their opinions on in terms of feedback. And as EDI practitioners, we do know that some folks may not necessarily change their perspectives, at least not in maybe in our lifetimes. But what we want to do is create that wave through that education, through that invitation, so you can't really stop it, right? So, and as we've seen throughout history, the wave hasn't stopped. So it's just to keep on putting these tools in place, but we must continue to plant these seeds so that they will bear fruit later on. And I think at this moment, this is a continuous bearing and seed planting position that we're in.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Really creating that tipping point where the majority of people are part of the choir that we're singing to or that we're preaching to. And for us too, the education piece is a cornerstone, but we also want to back it up with data. We hear backlash around, well, now as an able-bodied and typically male and often white person, I'm disadvantaged. But having that data at hand, again, we talked about metrics earlier, to say, well, let's look at this data and let's talk about what it actually tells us, and let's disaggregate it and look at, where are folks of color in the organization and where aren't they? And having those tools that we talked about, I think, in the first answer, to dispel some of the myths and to address that backlash in a way that doesn't necessarily feel personal, but is more objective, I think is really useful. But yeah, planting the seed and watching it bear fruit, particularly apt metaphor on our second day of spring, happily. Okay, wonderful answer, Nikki. Thank you. Sagal, I'm going to come to you for your thought.
Absolutely, thank you. Well, I'll just pick up right where you left it off, Michelle, because that was one of my point on this, is that for non-equity seeking groups, for them not to feel like special privileges are being given to others, it is important that the organization has an open and transparent conversation. For essentially, equity means creating tools to identify and address inequality, right? So the step before fixing the system is to show the data that backs up that there's a reason why we're conducting this, or there's a reason why we're going down this path. The other reality is that, for example, the Black population is 3.5% of the Canadian population. Therefore, to say that they will be taking up more space, or the space meant for others, the math doesn't really add up to it, right? And then, of course, to talk about the other point around tokenism, there is a saying that says 1 is tokenism, 2 is competition, 3 is inclusion. And therefore, what that means is that 1 will only be a sign of tokenism. 2, you are creating a sense of competition and addressing that scarcity. 3, you are creating that inclusion. 3 and more, you're creating that inclusion and that sense of collective. And therefore, in order for us to be able to reinforce, we're reinforcing the understanding that diverse voices need to be present at all level of the organization. And of course, that a diversity hire doesn't mean that the person is not qualified for the position. On the contrary, they are qualified, and they're just addressing a gap that the organization has shown that there needs to be an equal representation for. Of course, there's also determination that diversity is an asset to the organization, and it leads to better performance, and hence a more profitable organization. There is a study, or a McKinsey & Company 2020 study that found that gender and ethnicity wow, I can't believe I'm actually trumping on that word. Ethnically diverse executive team are 36% more likely to outperform their peers. So therefore, the data is there and the studies are there to show that there wouldn't be really a need for others to be taking space that are meant for minority, that we're just addressing and creating a more inclusive organization, and therefore a more diverse and equitable landscape. So I'll leave it here, Michelle.
Absolutely, all of that. You can't see me, but I'm back here nodding away enthusiastically. Thank you. Terri-Lynn, can I come to you for your thoughts on this one?
Absolutely, there's some great comments so far. I believe that knowledge is power, and that it's important for organizations to provide training to employees and to educate them on what diversity, equity, and inclusion really is. It's not about giving employment or opportunities to underqualified people because they're a far more marginalized group. It's a way to address the decades of underrepresentation in the workplace. It's affirmative action to remove barriers and to ensure that all individuals have an equal chance. And it's not about suppressing non-equity seeking groups, but it's about leveling out the playing field. This type of backlash is a defense mechanism, and it really prevents us from examining our own unconscious biases. So it's really important to create a safe space for these difficult discussions to take place, to explore these types of factors behind these thoughts and perceptions. We have a better diversity, biases, and allyship can be a great start.
Oh, I think we had a little technical glitch.
Am I back?
Okay, we're back. It wouldn't be a virtual presentation without a technical glitch. I think we've got Terri-Lynn.
It always happens that way. I don't know where I dropped off, but just to emphasize the part that training that focuses on diversity, biases, and allyship can be a great start to get those conversations started. When it comes to tokenism, it's important to create an inclusive environment where individuals feel like they belong, that they're valued, they're heard, and important to have unrepresented groups in leadership positions. And just a couple of other suggestions that I've seen and experienced throughout the industry is don't expect an individual to represent and act as a spokesperson for their identity group. And it's really important to have a balance of celebrating programs within an organization but to balance that out, not everything has to be like a huge media press release. Sometimes it can be uncomfortable for individuals when they're constantly asked to be singled out as a marginalized person.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for that. And thank you for bearing through the glitch there. Channa, I'm going to come to you for your final thoughts on this question.
Great. Thank you, Michelle. And thank you so much for the question by your colleague. I think we should use evidence-based research when we tackle this kind of question. But we also have to remind ourselves as to why we are doing this. We need to rally our employees, I think, around a common vision and inspire them to break down systemic barriers that have kept people from achieving their full potential for far too long. And in addressing this question, it is not entirely disconnected from the first question you asked about performative initiative. We must listen to our employee concerns and be flexible. But I think senior leadership must not waver on their commitment to implementing the action plan, recognizing they may have to make adjustments along the way based on employee feedback. When we recognize past injustices and the imperative that we have for a just society, people will realize that this is not so much of a zero-sum game. This is not about someone else gaining at your expense. So I think the perspective is important here. Again, as I said earlier, we must build empathy in our employees so that they can create the workplace of the future for generations of people to come. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. That building of empathy piece is so important, right? Studies have shown that when people know somebody who is from an underrepresented group or has had a certain type of experience, they're so much more able to empathize with that person and see the world through their perspective. So I think that's critically important. I'm going to bring it back to the full panel. I have so many thoughts bouncing around in my head, but I wanted just to open to the group. You know, we talked about driving progress. We talked about authenticity, accountability, you know, making this work real on every level. We talked about how to, I think, respond to backlash and really try to think of that from both perspectives of the people who we're focusing on and the people who are not focusing on. I would ask the group for any final thoughts or comments that people might have. I know we probably all want to respond to everybody else's ideas, but any thoughts that really jumped out at you that you'd like to share before we go to our performance? Okay, all right.
Oh, sorry.
Please go ahead.
No, so I know we're going to jump to the performance. I think one of the things that really stood out for me was the notion of data and metrics. And trust me, I am in agreement with the collection of data because we do have measurements to compare it by. I do know, like, in undertaking some of these EDI climate surveys, however, you know, there's an element of trust building that needs to go along with this, right? Because, you know, sometimes, you know, if I don't look, if my physical appearance may not identify me as a racialized person or belonging to an equity seeking group, I may not want to disclose that, right? So it's around, like, how do we communicate to our employees the practices of data collection in order to invoke that trust building, and how do we use that data effectively to create and foster the change moving forward?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And I think that's ongoing as we, you know, as we increase our efforts, as we collect data, as we talk to our populations about what we do. It's, you know, trust can't be assumed. I think we're always rebuilding it, particularly with groups who have experienced discrimination, harassment, marginalization, et cetera. And for people who for the first time feel that maybe that's what's happening with them. Well, thank you so much. This has been really, really interesting for me. It's a privilege to have these conversations with you, and I appreciate your time so much. Now it is my distinct pleasure to introduce Randell Adjei. He is Ontario's first Poet Laureate, and he is joining us today to share 2 poems. So welcome, Randell.
Hello, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you all for having me here today. It's a pleasure to be here to share some words with you today. So there's a quote that I'd love to start off with before I get started, which says, it's from an unknown speaker that says, equality is giving everyone a pair of shoes, while equity is giving everyone a pair of shoes that fit. And I'll never forget the moment I heard that quote, because it reminded me that in order to best serve those we want to serve, we have to understand what their needs are. We have to understand what their journey is, what their lived experience is. And so along that journey, there are difficulties, challenges that we will experience. And I think one thing I've learned about life is that adversity itself is inevitable. And because it's inevitable, because it doesn't judge, it doesn't discriminate, it's what we choose to do with the adversity. And I think this is a great opportunity and a great space here for us to create what the future can look like. And so I have a very short poem that I want to share with you, and then I'm gonna go into the two poems that I have presented today. I'm not my struggles. I am not my pain. They are just roadblocks that prove how far I came. And it's just a reminder to us all that no matter how many difficulties we face, it's a journey. You know, it's about recognizing that along the journey, we will learn, we will go through a lot of different lessons, and it's what you take away from it. The second poem is called Brokenness. And I think it's really important to highlight how much we can learn from these challenges that we go through. I wrote this poem at a very difficult point in my life, but a lot of lessons that I learned in that difficulty. So this is Brokenness. I know too many broken people, broke into pieces they think they cannot fix. Like shattered glass, they may cut you when you try to uplift, slicing the helping hands, hoping to heal the harm that's happened to them. They often hurt in silence, then smile in your face today, but tomorrow you may hear of how their brokenness has escalated into acts of violence. We often judge these broken people and call them names, label them, sometimes forgetting that, like flipping a coin, they too can change. But what does it really mean to be broken when it is broken people that have helped mend the world? I realize that in our brokenness is when our true lives have grown. Because see, brokenness is a sign of recreation. It is a sign of growth. But we fear brokenness because we fear the unknown and the uncertainty. But brokenness can piece our wholes together perfectly, sometimes permanently. After all, if you've never brokenness, then how would you know when you're a whole? If you've never been broken, then how would you measure your growth? So that was Brokenness. That was my first poem called Brokenness. My second piece is called The Power of the Tongue. And the power of the tongue is really a reminder to us all that the importance of how we use our words is really keen and really important, and that the tongue itself and how we speak and how we use our words is really keen and really important. So this is the power of the tongue. Since the day I learned my first word, self-expression has always been second nature. I am a child prodigy of third world parents, so I have to tell my forefathers' stories on paper. Silence for too long, the strength of my tongue sentenced me to a life of righting wrongs. My penmanship bridges the gaps of intergenerational dialogues, marginalized between the lines of lands my parents traveled, sacrificing the familiarity of home for me to make life's inevitable battles. So who am I to not be what I was destined? Who are you to not be what you were destined? Despite school systems that labeled me and sanctioned me to detention, despite the target on my back and private funding to put my melanin in prison correction, I will not be your stereotype. I am made from the essence above I am made from the essence of stardust above aerial heights. It is not my fault you cannot see the light in me. You cannot enlighten me on your capitalist commodities. I'm the rose that still adapted to blossom out of colonized concrete, capitalizing on conquered conquest my predecessors paved, placing poetic politic on history's page. It is these pages cut from my family trees that once hung our forefathers as slaves. It is these pages I tell their stories. It is these lines they once hung from I celebrate their glory just to stay connected to my roots. See, these pages are sacred. It's how hip hop's essence began as pure truth. But see, these days, I can't relate to what a lot of rappers are saying in the booth, because see, the spoken word is a gift. And you can have life worth by the mere coming out of lips. We can speak dreams into existence, creating a world united or divided, so you can choose to be the change.
or remain silenced. By size, the tongue is the strongest muscle and will connect us to the divine. More than just speaking, it keeps us believing. It is a portal between time and space mixed. The inspiration of ancient hieroglyphs. See, our words can build dynasties and mend broken bonds. Our words can create vitality and give us the freedom of redemption songs. Words can live beyond us like MLK's dream to see us so mindful. Be mindful of the words and the intentions that leave the sacredness of your tongue. We are powerful vessels. The Creator etched presence into our lungs, so you have a gift within you. Leave a legacy that will continue. Etch your name in the dendrochronology of history's pages. Do not allow the from and to on your tombstone just to be dated. Let the dash in between reveal the story you told and of the magic that you created. Thank you so much for having me today. It's a pleasure to be here, and just so much love and light to all the organizers, and I hope the rest of this event goes well. Thank you.
Wow. Thank you so much. There was a little bit of a technical glitch in the middle there, but you were frozen in a facial expression that I think really captured the moment. So hopefully everyone stayed tuned to hear the end of your second poem. That was beautiful. Thank you so much. All right, now I will pass it over to Ken Hartwig, President and CEO of Ontario Power Generation, to offer some closing remarks. Ken?
Thanks, Michelle. And this is a really, really inspiring session. So I want to thank the panelists for the conversation, because I think it's these types of conversations that help us keep learning, which is really what the essence, I think, of our ED&I journey is. And Randell, for the two poems that, again, they inspire in a different way, again, for all of us to think about what we need to do on this front. And really what I picked up from the panel was a couple of really important things. So one is the need to measure, and are we making progress, and being really honest with ourselves. We know this is a journey. We're at OPG, I think we're proud of what we've done to date, but as Michelle has referenced, we have a lot more to do. We have a lot more to do at the company, and we think by doing it, we here at OPG, that others will follow us in this leadership journey, and that's a really, really important thing for us to try to set out to do. And then the second part is really just around, I think, always remembering on our ED&I journey that it is about people. And again, like the reference to, we can all give everybody shoes, but imagine if we gave everybody a pair that fit, and how much easier that journey would be. So, like I say, it's these are all learning moments. I think it is something, Michelle, I want to congratulate you and the team for organizing this and for getting such amazing people to come and talk to us and share their story with us, which I think is great. And then now it really comes back onto everyone at OPG, everyone that's listening today, all 9,500 of our employees, to embrace each of the three elements of ED&I that we talked about, to embrace this journey to achieve something amazing, perhaps getting a little bit uncomfortable on some parts of it as part of our learning. But as we do that, we'll very quickly become comfortable and then be able to move forward much more quickly. So, really want to thank everyone involved, and I want to thank all for providing a teaching moment for those of us that listened and those that will listen subsequently to the event, for doing that as part of our learning journey. And I can tell you at OPG, we are committed to this. As Wendy said right at the beginning, this is important to the company. It's important to me. It's important to Michelle, everybody involved. And I think it's important to all the people that we, form part of our individual communities. And we're going to lead on this and do something very, very special as we move forward. So no pressure on you, Michelle, at all. But on the whole group of us, I think we have a big task in front of us to keep going on this journey, and we collectively will be successful. So back over to you.
No pressure, says the CEO and president of the organization. Well, you know what? Having your support, Ken, has been enormously helpful. Thank you so much for coming today. Thank you also to Wendy, Sagal, Terri-Lynn, Nikki, Channa, and Randell, it was just wonderful talking to all of you. And this brings us to, sadly, the end of our event. Thank you to everyone who signed in. You can read more about OPG's ED&I strategy at opg.com, and someone will pop a link in the chat if you'd like to have a look at the strategy. I wish you all just a wonderful, beautiful spring day. I hope it's sunny where you are. And thank you again.